that's just a good idea. I'll do the same. Turn my camera off. So recording. So let's see. That's not what I want. That's what I want. Now I think I can do this and record here too. Yeah, record slideshow. So I'll be able to record this in a bunch of different levels. Okay. Cool. So let's do this. All right. So we're recording on 2 different levels. It might be easier just to put the PowerPoint in, but we'll see. So chapter 1, science and psychology. So why do you study psychology? Well, there's quite a few different reasons to study psychology. I put some of the, I'm going to stand up while I do this. I get into nursing, fulfill a social and psychological science requirement, begin your career in a psychology-related field. Let's see, let me get my little laser pointer here. Okay, such as Bachelor of Social Work or psychology per se. So getting to learn about something interesting. Psychologists are actually really interesting. Obviously, if I thought it was boring, it'd be pretty much the wrong job for me to have. So that's the main reason. You have to take it probably at some point, but there's a lot of good careers you can get out of it. So what's this the study of? Mental activity and brain activity. This is, of course, the mind. The book says something to the extent that brain enables the mind, and mind is what the brain does. Well, yeah, kind of, I guess. Mind and brain are the same thing. It's the whole, brain, mind-body problem. We'll talk about that in chapter 4. So these are surprising results. If you're holding a hot cup of coffee, people seem warmer. It kind of gets things influenced or gets crossed over. So let's kind of keep going. So what can you do with it? A lot of jobs require knowledge of psychology. Get into grad school, like social work, and mental health direct care. This is that's what I call it. It's kind of paraprofessionals is what they are. They work with people with mental illnesses at like Shodair Hospital, other inpatients, mental health centers, et cetera, and the group homes. So they're really important component of the mental health system. As case managers is another one. They spend sometimes 8 hours with the person, so they're really quite key. So I call them mental health direct care. The book calls them paraprofessionals. Science is a cool thing. Science is a cool thing. It's kind of an amiable skepticism. Amiable skepticism. You're nice to each other, but you say, yeah, I'm calling BS on that one. So that's how science works, actually. Critical thinking. You have to really evaluate stuff. Critical, reasonable conclusions. The Mozart effect, for example, that's this idea that if you play Mozart to your babies, it makes them smarter. It doesn't really. It doesn't do anything. Do sweets make you jacked up? Yeah, for a while, but it doesn't cause ADHD. This last one, probably some of you have heard about this. There's this idea that you swallow spiders, like dozens of them during sleep every night. It's like, you do not. It's like, who came up with that? But this students asked me about that however many years ago. I've been doing this a while. And it's like, you do not swallow spiders during your sleep. So critical thinking. I just thought that was funny. So here's good science. Okay, there's good science and there's crappy science and there's pseudoscience and there's all this kind of stuff. We tend to not think scientifically, though. This is a thing. We tend to not think scientifically. Ignore the evidence. This is a big one now with COVID. And with COVID, people, we're getting close to 300,000 people dying, dead from COVID, but people are just still saying, nope, it's not. Accurately judge source credibility. No, I don't know. Anthony Fauci, the head of infectious disease, who knows what he's talking? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Some schmuck who is on Facebook clearly does know. People don't understand stats. They're kind of hard to understand, but we'll cover that in chapter 2, actually. Relationships where none exist. Things can correlate, but not actually have anything to do with each other. Relative comparisons, using wrong ones. Well, one thing about the coronavirus is that it does give me a lot of material to lecture on. They're using comparisons with it and the common cold or influenza. They are not the same. So that's a bad thing. Mental shortcuts. Don't think about things. And your own inadequacies. There's done on, what is it, the Durham-Kruger effect, where people who think they're smart are actually not, and vice versa. So it's been around a long time. Yeah, a long time. Confucius, Greeks, etc. thought about this. The mind body, again, this is chapter 4, dualism. Dualism is the idea. Get to old Descartes here. Here's Descartes. French guy. He's the guy that said, "I think, therefore I am." Okay. His idea was that there's mind stuff and brain stuff, and they're completely different. Hence, dual. There's two of them. But he's wrong. There's not two things. It's all one thing. We just don't know quite how it's one thing. We'll talk about Mary the Color Scientist in chapter 4. Actually, what I'm doing there, talking about Mary the Color Scientist, and it's called distributive learning. And I'm already referring to things we're going to learn in these next few weeks. So as you talk about it first and then learn it later, it'll ring a bell, and that helps you learn the material. It's called distributed learning. It's distributed across time. Wilhelm Wundt, cool beard. First opened the first lab in Leipzig, Germany. So he looked at reaction time, that it takes a while to respond to the environment. Okay, that's what he studied. But the main thing with him is he had a lab. He added the ology. I'll get my pen. I like doing this here. He added the ology to psychology. He looked at introspection. Introspection is this idea that you can report your internal states. Is it valid? People will debate it. When we get to behaviorism, we'll talk about that. But spoiler alert, yeah, it's valid. We can do that. It's called cognition. Titchener, I guess. Also cool beard. Maybe I should change color now. Let's go to red. So broken down, his idea, they're broken down by different qualities. Same also though, had introspection, but found that when you report something, it changes them. I'm sort of making a face there, aren't I? There we go. So when you report an experience, it changes them. And that's really messy now. William James, great. He's if you have time to, I'm sure everybody has time, but someday if you have time, read his book, Principles of Psychology. It's a really good book, actually. It's been years since I've read it, but it's one of those things we could read when you become a psychology major, which I was. It didn't say that we had chunks. Like here he had broken down into basic components. He didn't have that. He had a stream of consciousness. You probably have heard about the stream of consciousness. And that what that means is it just flows from one moment to the next. And it doesn't have little chunks of consciousness. Actually, kind of the cool thing about it is we probably do have little chunks of consciousness, but they're so short that it's a stream-like. It feels like a stream. That's actually a Tibetan Buddhist finding. They do a lot of introspection, right? And that's what they do. They meditate all the time. And they talk about how consciousness comes in like little quanta, like quantum mechanics stuff, which is interesting. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's kind of cool. In Darwin, okay, Darwin, we got a little thing there as well. Basically had evolution, right? Heritability, variation, and selection. So if something gets inherited, gets passed along, it changes some. Okay, it doesn't have complete fidelity. It changes a little bit, and some of them are better than others. Okay, some of those changes are better than others. That's called evolution. Okay, that you have to get evolution from that. You must, to quote Susan Blackmore, which you'll see one of the TED Talks down the road. You must have evolution. There's no choice. Natural selection. Okay, that's what that is. Natural selection. There's nothing supernatural about it. Things evolve and they fit to where they are. It's really, people sometimes don't like the idea of evolution. And I think one of the reasons behind that is that it's so simple. If something gets inherited very slightly, it doesn't have complete fidelity, and some of those variations are more fit than others, and you get evolution. It explains everything from bacteria to humans. And the bacteria that are in humans, because we have a lot of bacteria, of course, on our skin and in our noses and in our bowels. Don't think about that too long. So, yeah, it's prominent in the field for sure. But But we don't emphasize it a lot, but it is something that people talk about, of course. And Gestalt, get that out of the way. Gestalt is the whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. And what this is, I mean, you can kind of see here, you got the triangle. You're going to do this, right? There's a triangle. You fill that in, even though it's not there. I'm going to try something here, though. Go back through here. There we are. Now, it looks like a triangle, but you can change it just slightly. Let's see if I can do this. I'm going to give it a little eye. I guess I have to do it with my hand. Bonk. I'm trying to make them into little Pac-Man, but it's not really working. Oh well. So never mind. That failed. Still learning some of this stuff. Yeah. Oh, that was highlighter. There we are. Now making them into little Pac-Man. The triangle kind of goes away, and there's Pac-Man kind of attacking each other. And that's the idea. You fill in the blanks, and people probably see the doggy there, even though there's not really a dog there. It's just a bunch of spots. We fill in the blanks. That's the idea of this. Another one's pretty easy to do, and I might as well do it because I can play around. That's a face. Okay, people see a face with that. It's not, right? It's just a couple of fairly poorly drawn eyes and a little curved line. But that's Gestalt. We fill in the blanks by schemas, actually. Another thing you'll get throughout this, a thing you're going to get throughout this semester is the idea of schemas. We have schemas for everything. Schemas for what faces look like, schemas for how you should behave at work, schemas for dating, schemas for having dinner, all that stuff. We have schemas, including schemas about who we are as an individual. That's kind of cool. Here's another Gestalt. Is that two people looking at each other or one person behind a candlestick? You'll notice that when you look at that, it's either one looking at you or two looking at each other. You can't really see both. Your brain fills in the gaps. And that's the brain filling in the gaps idea. That's going to be a key one, actually, throughout the semester, because it's almost spooky how much our brains fill in the gaps. But they really do. It's kind of funny that we really fill in the gaps. I might play Led Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven backwards for you, Scott. Are you familiar with that Led Zeppelin Stairway to Heaven backwards?
No.
Okay, well we'll do that before we're done here. We'll finish or before we finish today. I'll link it to everybody too. But it's pretty funny. It really kind of illustrates the point of Gestalt. So here's I'm changing here, excuse me. I'm sitting all day long is not good for my back, so I'm kind of moving around. So I used to pace back and forth in front of a classroom for 3 hours a day, but now I have to sit and look at a computer for 3 hours a day. But your textbook mentions women, but they don't really, whereas with the men, they talk about what they did, blah, blah, blah. With the women, they say, oh, yeah, there's a woman too. And they actually took one out with this edition, which I think is absolutely and completely sexist, which it is. So I put them back in. Mary Calkins went to Harvard, studied with William James. This guy. So that's pretty cool. I wish I could study with William James. That'd be amazing. But Harvard denied a PhD because she was a woman. But Wellesley, she taught there and published a textbook. First woman, first psychology lab, first woman president of the APA, worked on the idea of self, memory and self, which is really a big topic in psychology. And will be one that we cover, of course, because we cover pretty much every topic in psychology, hence the term intro to psychology. So very prominent. And Margaret Floy Washburn, they took her out of this book. She studied with Titchener. This guy. So one, nice hair. Two, second woman of the president of the APA, studied animal behavior, motor theory, and development. So again, very, very much just a doctorate, first PhD, philosophy doctorate. You'll notice now that more and more women are in the field. In fact, it's almost it's very much more women than men in medicine, not quite as much in medicine, but it's getting there, but certainly within psychology, social work, actually. There's more and more women going into the field. And Ziggy Freud, Pink Freud, just a kind of an old joke. Used to have a lot to do with psychiatry. He was one of the big figures in psychiatry, but frankly, a lot of his theories, like psychoanalysis, were kind of shown to be not have a lot of scientific merit. But that said, he studied conversion disorders. Let's see, I'll get rid of those. Conversion disorders are where something occurs, but there's no neurological basis for it. So some people that won't be able to move their hands, say their hands are paralyzed. Well, neurologically, where the nerves go, that can't happen. He was a neurologist, so he was interested in that, pursued it, and ended up coming up with unconscious processes and whatnot. And those are true. We have a bunch of unconscious processes. In fact, most of what we do is unconscious. But so it doesn't get into the level of consciousness. But some of the other stuff with the id and ego, etc., did not hold true. So I'm going to have to change colors here because I'm in red. Let's go to dark blue. So I had students give me a Pink Freud T-shirt, but instead of a cigar, it had a joint in it. I did not notice said joint. My schema was with Freud, because this is a classic Freud picture, that with Freud picture of this sort, you have a cigar. So I wear this shirt to work. And people point out, you realize that's a joint? No, I did not realize that was a joint. So don't do that. It was pretty funny, though. It was pretty funny. I still have the shirt and I wear it now, but not to work. But yeah, I totally didn't notice. So behaviorism, they kind of dominated psychological research into the 1960s. Skinner, Watson, Pavlov, not the Pavlov's job. We'll have that joke later. They basically said you could only study behavior, that all this subjectivity, all this introspection is not good science because you can't really measure it. But it's actually not true. It's actually not true at all, because we can measure people's cognitions. We can also have a pretty good idea what's in people's minds. For example, Scott, what's in your mind right now is a horse. You're visualizing a horse just like that. And now you're having a horse on top of a beach ball, which is strange. It must be a big beach ball. And there you go. I can assure you, you have a horse and a beach ball on your mind now. I do that throughout the semester, by the way. It'll irritate you. but behavior therapy, type of psychotherapy is actually really effective. And we'll get to that in chapter 15. But actually, we get that in learning as well. But you can learn without conditioning. Okay, this is where some of the behaviorism stuff kind of went by the wayside, because you can learn. You don't have to have everything conditioned with again, when we get to learning, we'll talk about this more in more depth. But you don't just classically condition your ability to drive somewhere. We have cognitive maps. Another thing that we'll learn about later. Again, this is now using distributed learning. So cognitive map is you can picture things in your brain, where things are. For example, if you've been to, where do you want to go? How about Vans? In fact, what store do you like going to, Scott?
Oh, I usually go to Winco or something.
Oh, well, I've never been to Winco.
Oh,
so,
it's close to my house.
Oh, it's close to your house? Okay, that makes sense then. But I can sit, I mean, you can too, just sit in the parking lot outside of Winco. I've never been in the parking lot outside of Winco, but I've seen it on the road. I've seen the buildings around it, and I can imagine myself sitting in that parking lot looking around, and you can too. Okay, so just sort of look around the parking lot. You can do that, right? It's kind of trippy in a way that we can do that. And everybody else who's listening to this later, you're also now sitting in the parking lot of Winco looking around. We can do that without any kind of conditioning. We can just imagine it. So that's cognitive. Don't worry, I'll do this to you throughout the semester. So cognitive psychotherapy. Again, this is one, we'll get to that later, but I distribute it throughout the semester. But we do have cognitive psychology. Okay, that's just the case. We know it's in your head. We can tell. And where it is now is cognitive neuroscience. Okay? So this is kind of a clever way of getting out of the mind-brain problem, because it's instead of saying, oh, what's the difference? Mind, brain, how are they together? Well, we'll just say cognitive, which is mind, and neuro, which is brain. So cognitive neuroscience, bada boom, bada bing, the whole problem is no longer a problem. We just real cleverly call it this. It sounds very scientific, and therefore we can get rid of the problem. That's true. Gazzaniga, the author of the textbook, he actually coined the term cognitive neuroscience, which is pretty cool that we have the textbook from the guy who coined that term. But the story is that he and a colleague were driving to a conference, and they're in a taxi to a conference, and they're trying to figure out what they should call this new field. And they came up with the term cognitive neuroscience in that taxi on the way to the conference. And there it is. It's still there today. Everything is linked. Every cognition you have has corresponding brain activity. Of course it does. It's like saying, that's like saying every breath you take has lung activity. Well, of course it does. That's like, okay, that's not really that hard. Every blood vessel has, cardiac activity. Yes, it does. So it seems kind of interesting because of the mind-brain issue, but when you realize that they're not different, that mind and brain are the same thing, it's like, well, yeah, of course they are. What else would it be? Social psychology, we have a whole chapter on that, all kinds of stuff there, how people influence each other, willingness to follow. And we'll have when we get to social psychology, there's going to be a few things I'll try to do. It's hard to do them on this format, as far as willingness to follow and obedience. In classroom, I'd have people raise their hands. You just go ahead and raise your hands, and everybody would. It's because I'm the guy in front of the class, I'm the professor, and I tell students to raise their hand, and they do. It's a little bit hard to do in this format, though. In personality psychology, this is basically reviewing the different types of psychologies. Biochemistry, brain chemistry, neuroscience. Actually, one thing people going into this social work program have to take is biological psychology. So we'll get a lot of that. That'll be fun. Maybe I'll have the video on the connectome. I don't know. This idea of the Human Connectome Project. The idea is that you can somehow map every neuron in your brain and every connection those neurons have with other neurons. It's a pretty Herculean, is that, or maybe hubris task, because we have about 100 billion neurons, thereabouts. Each of those have like 10,000 connections. So that's kind of a lot. Excuse me. So to think you can map those, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. And we make new connections. New connections and new pathways. I mean, you're getting some now as you're having this experience. You'll have a memory of this experience to some degree, and so it's the map is always changing. It's kind of like the stairways on Harry Potter, and in the Harry Potter where they kind of just keep moving around. So it's kind of like that. Epigenetics is cool. Yay, epigenetics. This is, you change how your DNA is expressed. You don't necessarily change the DNA itself, but how it's expressed. And that's really cool. There's studies looking at this through generations with anxiety, with depression, with all this sort of stuff, that the genes themselves can be transferred, actually can have evolution through generations by this idea of epigenetics. So that's pretty cool, actually. Evolution we've talked about. Cultural neuroscience, it's basically, you can have everything neuroscience, cultural neuroscience, social neuroscience, interpersonal neuroscience. It's one of those things, if you tack the term neuroscience on the end of something, it sounds a lot smarter. Then maybe you can have quantum neuroscience. That sounds even really smart. We're not the only species of hominids. People don't know this, so I throw on the slide. This is as far as our evolution. So yeah, it's kind of a cool thing, really, because we moved out of Africa in waves, and we took wave upon wave. So Australopithecine was the first human-ish. It wasn't still part of the genus Homo. That's the genus species, right? Genus species. So this was the genus Australopithecines. an Afarenus, I think it is, but they walked upright. They most of the time. The show Big Bang Theory, this relates to Homo habilis, by the way, and the TV show Big Bang Theory. I had students, say I should watch the show. It's a nerdy show, and I'm nerdy, so I should watch the show. I couldn't watch it because the opening song, the theme song to the thing, talked about Neanderthals developing tools. They did not. Homo habilis developed tools. In fact, habilis means handy. It means he could handle tools. So I got really pissed off. That's like millions of years before Neanderthal. And so I couldn't watch the show. So it's just that weird. And then once we become humans, of course, we get the nice mullet and the peak of civilization. We coexisted with the Neanderthals. In fact, if you went north and east out of Africa, so like Asian, European, Middle East, we all have about 2% Neanderthal DNA. Africans who went south and west from the Rift Valley did not breed with Neanderthals. So it's kind of an interesting thing. We also have Homo erectus DNA, etc. This is Homo floresiensis over here. This is a species of human that also we coexisted with. They lived on the island of Florence in Indonesia. What happened is the Earth got warm, went from the Ice Age, and everything kind of melted off. So they got isolated on the Florence and became small. It's called island dwarfism, as a matter of fact. Lots of animals do that. But they came across this in a cave, and sure enough, it's a whole other species of humans. This thing is kind of cool. In various levels of analysis, this is a little bit, because obviously these all relate to each other, right? I better get to a different color because this is blue. But we have, we can look at our neurochemistry and how it affects our individual differences, which go to our interpersonal behavior, which is influenced by our culture, which can go back and influence our brain chemistry. So they're all pretty much tied together. We like dividing things up as humans, right? We like to have things sort of broken down, but in reality, that they really aren't. They're all kind of tied together. And here's the culture of that. Here's kind of your intense Western people and less intense non-Western people. Guys having some kind of toast there. Mom's already on the computer. In ethnomusicology, this is we'll have a lot of these cool scans, and they are cool. They're very cool scans, but they're to me, they're cool and they're important, and that's helping us understand brain activity and cognition activity. But to get surprised that some cognitive or behavioral process occurs in the brain, well, of course it does. Once again, where else would it be? So, by the way, we're going to get into the precuneus and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. Now, this is where, between these two things, our sense of individuality lies. When we're thinking about our sense of self, I better get a different color here. How about, I'll do purple, not much purple. Sense of self. When we're thinking about ourselves, that part of our brain is lit up. When we're not thinking about ourselves, it goes away, which is kind of interesting. So good meditators, people who've meditated for a long time and they sort of lose the sense of self, that part of the brain has decreased. People who have disorders of self, it's now called dissociative identity disorder, but people know it as multiple personality disorder, where people literally have different personalities within their brain. It is actually a thing. These areas of the brain, so it's the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and the precuneus. That's really bad. I'll spell that better later. Those parts of the brain are malfunctioning. They're not working, which is, again, just sort of bizarre that a sense of individuality has this brain correspondence. But again, of course it does, but it's still interesting. And subfields, there's a bunch of them. Most people talk about clinical psychology when they think of psychology, but that's just one, about half of clinical psychologies. Neuroscience, cognitive, experimental, school, personality, developmental, et cetera, et cetera. There's lots of different kinds of psychologists. Industrial and organizational psychology, people can make some pretty good money there. They look at how to best sell stuff, how to best manage things. That's pretty cool. And then sports psychology, how to do better at sports. Let's see. And here's that picture. No, I think that's the end. Let me stop recording. I think I stopped recording. Okay. All right, so let me go to Teams here. I'll stop recording that. There we go. Stop recording.